Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel. It is so nice to see you again. I hope you're doing well. I know the last video I posted was also a recent reads, and I just want to make sure that you know that's not the only thing I will be posting. The course section of my master's is drawing to a close in like 2 weeks, and after that all I have is a research paper to write until August. So I will have a lot more time on my hands, and I am just itching to get back into making videos. I've got all these ideas bouncing around. I'm just ready to be done with school. So I promise this is not the only thing you'll be seeing from me. This is not the last you've heard from me either. In the meantime though, I thought it would be fun to kind of just sit and talk about some books I've read since the last time I caught up with you. Now, if you follow me on Instagram and TikTok and Goodreads especially, you will see what I have been reading, but I thought it would also be good to just kind of touch base here and get slowly back into the process of making videos. I think the best way to start is by talking about books that I mentioned in the previous video, just as books that I'm currently reading or want to read. So we'll do those. But as for the rest of the books, I'm not going to be going over literally every single thing I've read since the last time. That would be exhausting. So I've just kind of grouped them into categories or things that I'm more excited to talk about or just really want to get my thoughts out there. But either way, it might be a little long. So grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's chat. Like I said, I'm starting with books that I mentioned in the previous video. So the first one of these that I want to talk about briefly is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. So if you don't know, this is about Patrick Bateman, who lives in New York City, and he's this gentleman who works at this like firm. Nobody really knows what he does. Doesn't really matter because he is slowly spiraling out of control. And it's basically just an exploration of the human psyche and what it goes through after being exposed to the capitalist hellscape that was the 80s and just our world in general. For some reason, I don't know what possessed me, but very soon after finishing this, I proceeded to pick up Ham on Rye by Charles Bukowski, which is just a character study of some guy who wants to be a deadbeat. Also, kind of following similar themes of like capitalism and just the absolute worst that society has to offer, but that one took place following the Great Depression. The reason I'm grouping these books together is because I finished them both. I found them both just vile, super unpleasant to read, really hard to get through, and yet they have weirdly stuck with me since finishing them. Now, Ham on Rye is a bit more of a character study, like I mentioned. It goes really, really deep. Like, you're just following this character and his thoughts. It's not really a descent into madness. It's just really him becoming disillusioned with his parents and his school and his schoolmates, and just seeing his life kind of follow this trajectory that most people don't follow, but it seems like the only option to him. Versus this is definitely more of a psychological horror. You're really following Patrick Bateman descend into madness, but it's not about him. It's just a broader societal critique. Like I said, something about both of these books has just stuck with me so weirdly since finishing that I have started really long review/discussions for both of them. I started writing a script because I knew I wanted to talk about them. I have not had a chance to finish either of those because I really just need to sit down and write them, but they're books that I really just want to talk about like at length here with you guys, so I will save that for then. Just know that I don't think I liked either of these, but something about them just gripped me. Another book I'd mentioned as currently reading in the previous video was the Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. So this is the story of the devil's sojourn to Moscow during the Soviet era. And he's there for just 3 days with a couple of cohorts, and he just wreaks havoc on the city. And I ended up absolutely loving this. It's such a weird book. It is such a trippy book, but at the same time, it's one that I know I'll have to come back to over and over to really pick out different parts and really get to learn and know the book fully, because there's so much packed in here. One of my other favorite things about this book is talking to other people who've read it, because everyone gets something a little bit different out of it. I mentioned this a couple of times, but my mom absolutely loves this book. My grandparents have also read it. All three of them lived in the Soviet Union, and they all got so many different things out of it that I got not having lived through it. And it's just so fun to sit and explore all the little nuances of this book. It's also just fantastically written, obviously, and it's so weird and quirky and fun. It's just a trip, and I recommend it to literally everyone. I think everyone could get something out of this. I'm also very pleased to announce that I finished The Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. I've been reading this for about 1.5 years at the time that I finished it. It took me forever simply because it is very dense, but it's fantastic. So this is a nonfiction book. It's a history lesson basically about all the different ways that the West has failed South America. It's not just a failure, but an exploitation of the entire continent of South America. No square acre of land was spared from the absolute pillage that occurred on that continent. This is one of those books that I just know I'll reference over and over and over again, partly because I learned so much, but also because the writing is just absolutely breathtaking. This is one of those books that just has so much to offer beyond the scope of its story. I truly commend the translator for working on this, because there's just so much in here that I imagine would be really difficult to translate and keep its beautiful poetic quality, but somehow the translator managed. It was translated by Cedric Belfrage, and honestly, hats off, but Galliano just writes so poetically. It's so heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, but you just can't help and feel invested, even though these are not necessarily even stories of people, which normally get invested in, but just the heartbreak that entire populations feel when they are faced with the same problems over and over again that have easy solutions, but the West just doesn't fucking care. This is another one of those books I'd recommend to literally everyone. I think this is a book people really need to pick up, because it just gives a really good window into how our world works and how it's always worked. It's one of those situations where we think we've gotten rid of colonialism, but in reality its impacts are still incredibly relevant to certain parts of the world, most parts of the world, and it's really important to see just how it still plays out. Even though the book was published in the 70s, I'm sure a lot of these effects are being felt. There's, you know, continual upheaval and issues in this part of the world that could easily be solved if we just learn to not be greedy capitalist pigs. Just a thought. But it's just one of these books that, like, this is a classic in my mind. This is something that everyone should read, even if you don't think you're into history, even if you don't think you're into geopolitics or critiques of capitalism or any economic system. This is just something you absolutely should read. I fucking loved it. I had a weird little period where I read 3 feminist adjacent books in quick succession, so I think I'll group them together and talk about them here. So I read Trainwreck by Sadie Doyle, I read Savage Appetites by Rachel Monroe, and I read Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. Trainwreck is more pertinent to pop culture, so as the subtitle suggests, it's women that we love to hate, mock, fear, and why. So it takes figures through history or celebrities that we've kind of deemed a train wreck, irredeemable, just completely lost, and just messy, and we're kind of look into why we feel this way, why we feel okay to talk about these women this way, and what that says about womanhood as a whole. It also really looks into why it is women that we continuously tear down when they're already at their lowest, so long as they're in the public eye, but why we don't really do the same to men. And there's plenty of examples of both in this, and I think it's just a really, really good little insight into the way we view people whose lives are up for debate, even though technically they're not. But you know, the second you become a celebrity or someone in the public eye, it's like everything is up for debate, and it kind of explores why we feel so entitled to people's bodies and people's decisions, especially women. While there wasn't a ton of super insightful feminist critique in this, I did actually enjoy how accessible it was. I think it's a book almost anyone can pick up and just get something out of. It's quite quotable too. I find there's a lot of things that just kind of hit you in the gut while you're reading this, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's definitely something that I consider like an introductory feminist lens on stuff. It's not, like I said, incisive, insightful, in-depth, but it was quite good. Savage Appetites, instead of being pop culture, relates more to true crime. So it follows 4 different women who are kind of archetypes in crime. So you have the detective, you have the victim, you have the defender, and then you have the perpetrator or possible perpetrator. So in this case, there's a woman who is one of the first women to become a crime scene investigator. You also follow a woman who falls in love with an alleged murderer who is in prison and wants to save him. You follow a woman who gets involved in the family of a victim. And you also follow a woman who was caught right before she committed a massive atrocity to pay homage to her heroes, the men behind Columbine. This book, despite being about four main things and being about crime, really touched on so many different topics, and that could be good or bad depending on where you're coming at it from. If you know this going in, you might be a little bit more okay with it. I kind of was hoping it'd be a bit more focused on the woman, but unfortunately when it comes to crime and ethics and, you know, there's just so many different moving parts involved. It's not, crime doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of societal things that go into it, so I'm not surprised that she did it that way. It just kind of was a little jarring. This book really touched, like I said, on literally everything, including true crime conventions, including Columbiners and online like fan groups for various killers. It touched on police culture, it touched on the justice system, it touched on the idea of the perfect victim and just the idea of victimhood in general. It just had a lot of things that it pulled into it, and it did make for a very complete read. I felt like after I'd finished it, there was nothing I was really missing or that I wanted more out of it. It was quite good overall. While this isn't a book that I think I'd go back and reread just for funsies, there are quite a few things I had to say that I really did enjoy that I've written down and just I know I will come back to just in my life or when things happen. Just the things it had to say specifically that resonated with me were the things about female victims, male perpetrators, and what happens when people just don't act in the way we expect them to act. And I think it was really interesting from that standpoint. Finally, in this little category, Men Who Hate Women, I expected to love this one the most, but unfortunately was my least favorite out of the three. So this book is centered on mostly the manosphere and kind of manosphere adjacent groups of men who are violent misogynists. And while this one's incredibly pertinent, there's a lot of things I didn't quite like about how this book was written and how the information was presented. There's definitely things that I learned from it, but not that many, and maybe I'm just chronically online, but I felt like I knew a lot of the information in this book. And while that's not necessarily a knock against the book, I just feel like when you're presenting this kind of important information, I mean, you're talking about incels, but you're also talking about the less polarizing sides of the manosphere, the ones that are public facing, the ones that have millions of followers. You really need to make sure people understand what the situation is, and I felt like the author was not well equipped to do that. Bates took such an extreme approach, and it was a very panicked approach. She would present these numbers that, with all due respect, in the context of the internet are negligible. These are small fringe groups. And of course, the violence that they breed within their forums has bled out into real life. I think making this massive panic around these small groups is not quite the way to go. And the frustration I felt was doubled by the fact that it felt like she did not really know what she was talking about when it came to the internet. There was just basic terminology that she kind of got wrong. I don't know if she meant to do that out of fear of like repeating herself and using the same words over and over, but it's something that just really, really bugged me, because I feel like if you are going to come on and act as a figure of authority on this topic, there needs to be a certain amount of, you know, getting your ducks in a row so that people can trust you and know that you have actually some kind of authority to be talking about this. This is not one I would recommend if you're, again, maybe chronically online or already really aware of these groups, but if you don't really know too much about them or all the different sects of them, because it didn't just talk about incels, it talked about pickup artists, MGTOW, it talked about how it bled into real life with young boys, which was probably the most interesting part for me, because Laura Bates is someone who goes around schools and talks to people about rape culture and sexual assault. So that part was probably the most interesting to me because it's something that I hadn't experienced. But if you're someone that is online quite a bit, you'll probably know a lot of this, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But if you are looking for an introduction or maybe to suggest it to someone, maybe parents of young kids, that would be probably the better target audience for this book. I just wasn't it. Okay, let's get into something a little lighter maybe. In retrospect, I'm not sure how light this is, but I finished The Realm of the Elderlings. I'm not pulling it off the shelves because I read the final 3 series in the larger Realm of the Elderlings, so I'm just gonna hold up the final book in the series that made me cry like nobody's business. If you don't know by now, 1, I'm a massive fan of Robin Hobb, but 2, this is a series set in this world where you're mainly following Fitz, who is the bastard son of the king in waiting, who, upon finding out that he has a bastard son, abdicates the throne, leaving the family to deal with Fitz. I can't even speak about this series without going into like full spiral because it's just so incredible. It's so hard to wrap up a 16-book series, and yet Robin Hobb managed. And while there's some rumblings about her writing more books in the series, if it ends here, I will be incredibly happy because it just felt correct. I definitely fall into the group of people who think that the Rainwild Chronicles, which is the second to last series, the quartet, is probably the weakest. However, I think I like it a lot more than most people. I genuinely thought that it was just I still thought it was better than most people's best. And that's Robin Hobb at her worst. I think Robin Hobb's publisher did her dirty because initially it was supposed to be 3 books and then they told her to split it up into 4 from what I've heard. And I think that really ruined the pacing of the books as an individual. But as a whole, I thought the story was still quite fantastic. It gave a lot of context to the world and it set some things up for the final series that I didn't really expect, but I absolutely loved. The other 2 series that I had read were the other 2 Fitz trilogies. So there was the first one that starts with Assassin's Apprentice. I'd read that one a while ago, so I had the other 2 Fitz series to read. So there was the Tawny Man, which I loved and didn't think the final one could top, and yet the Fitz and the Fool series just topped it somehow. I don't know how she does it. I don't know what magical entity created Robin Hobb, but I will follow her to the ends of the earth because there's no characters quite like these. There's no writing quite like this. There's no world quite like this one. She just writes humanity and emotion and people so well that it will never cease to amaze me. But I will cut myself off here, but this will not be the last of the Realm of the Elderlings on my channel. You can be assured. I will find a way to talk about these books all the time. Another series I literally just finished the day before filming this video that I want to just briefly talk about because I think I'm still formulating my thoughts, but that is the First Law trilogy. So Blade Itself, Before They Are Hanged, and Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is a hard series to explain, but I will try. This is a grimdark fantasy series following a few people moving around in this very bleak world. One of the people is a torturer for the large kingdom, the Union. One of the people is an officer in the army in the Union. He's young, he's kind of arrogant, stuck up. He's had everything handed to him his whole life, so he doesn't really think he needs to work for anything. He's kind of a womanizer. And then war comes knocking on the doorstep. You're also following someone from the north in this world, which is kind of more akin to maybe Vikings or old Anglo-Saxons. They're just kind of more loose people. They don't really have a kingdom. They're just fighters and lovers and have their little villages and do their stuff. But they are all together getting sucked into this world and its politics and its war. So I'd featured The Blade Itself in a 5-star prediction video that I did 3 years ago now because it just sounded like everything I would love. However, this book is really a setup book. You're really just getting to know some of the main players in this world, and it's not incredible by itself, but this is really one of those series that's greater than the sum of its parts. Unlike someone like Brandon Sanderson, who kind of creates each book as its own standalone, at least in the Mistborn series that I'd read from him and Warbreaker, this is definitely one of those that you need to read together. It needs to be read all together and taken together as 3 parts of a whole, and that whole is magnificent. This world is brutal, it is bleak, it is harsh, none of the characters are good. This is true gray morality. None of these characters are good people, and yet you are still so invested, but not in the way that you're invested in villains, because they're not villains. They're technically your protagonists, but they're just not good people. But it's fascinating. There's also so much in here about cycles of violence and whether anything you do really matters in the end. What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a good leader? What does it mean to do things your own way when all the odds are stacked against you? It's just so fascinating, and it's definitely a series I'll need to reread. I definitely will be continuing with the world of the First Law. I know there are 3 standalones that are like short story collections that I have to read before getting to the next trilogy, and I'm very much looking forward to it because as bleak as this world is, you come to really understand the finer nuances and machinations of it. So I'm excited to dig into it and keep learning about the world and all of the little nuances and stuff. I quite enjoyed it. All right, following from that high note, let's talk about some disappointing and or bad books, because I'd planned a whole reading vlog for this book. I started it, I filmed all of it, and then I scrapped it because the experience of reading the book just tainted the entire vlog for me. And that's Babel by R.F. Kuang. You may notice I've already gotten rid of my copy because I had a friend come over and I was telling her about it, and I came to the realization that I just don't care about this book. So Babel, oh, the way I was so hyped for this, I had it pre-ordered from the UK. I was just so excited. Babel is a story about a boy named Robin who gets plucked from his Chinese village at a young age by some mysterious Englishman who brings him to study at Oxford at the Translators College. In this world, translators are necessary because you need to know multiple languages to work with silver, which is the main magical material in this world. And silver is what makes the English Empire function, basically, in this version of our world. As Robin gets into his studies, makes friends, he starts to realize that he's been lied to a lot. He needs to learn some hard truths about the world, about his identity, about his mysterious benefactor slash father figure. There's just a lot of things he needs to learn, and this kind of culminates in a very, very necessary discussion about violence and revolution. But unfortunately, this book just did not work for me. I think there are some really great nuggets in this book. I think there are the beginnings of a really good book. I just think it needed an overhaul in terms of its writing and editing. I don't think R.F. Kuang's the greatest writer ever. I did really enjoy the Poppy War series, but that one, the simplistic style of her prose in that series really worked for the brutal nature of the world in the book. Babel, however, took on a more lyrical quality in the writing, and it felt really disjointed from some of the more harsh things happening and harsh discussions happening. I also felt like I was being beat over the head with colonialism bad, and obviously that's not an inherently bad theme or message to send. I felt like R.F. Kuang just needed to go further with it, and there's a lot of people that disagree, and that's fine. I've read plenty of books and articles relating to anti-colonialism and decolonialism. I'm pretty well versed in the subject, and I just thought it was kind of lazily handled in this book. Obviously, it's not the only topic handled in the book. There's a lot to do with academia, there's a lot to do with Robin's own identity. I mean, the subtitle of the book is The Necessity of Violence, so obviously there's discussions around political violence and when is it okay to use violent means to achieve an end, especially if that end is liberation for all people. I just felt it wasn't well done, and that's just my opinion at the end of the day. This book seems to be getting a bit more divisive. Early reviews were mostly overwhelmingly positive. TikTok seems to love this book. I can see why people do. It just fell really flat for me. I just found it quite mediocre. I didn't think it was bad by any means. It just was such a disappointment. Speaking of mediocrity, I want to briefly shout out the absolute worst book I've ever read in my adult life. And okay, preface, I did not plan to read this because I knew I would not like it. And I am specifically calling out Ray and Robin, who managed to convince me to read it because they both read it. They managed to enjoy it. Good for them. I'm so happy for them. They knew I would not like it, but they said, if you don't really have time to get into something dense, if you have a little bit of time and just want to do something dumb and fun, read Fourth Wing. I'm susceptible to peer pressure. I said yes. Worst fucking book I've ever read. I don't want to be another person harping on this book for views, which is why I do not want to make a full review video, even though I do have a full rant review written up in my Notion where I plan my videos and script them, because I have so much to say about this book. I will hold off. I don't want to be someone who just posts things for views. A lot of people don't like this book. There's a lot of very good reviews on it already. But I have a lot of thoughts, and they mostly boil down to how did this get published? Listen, there's fun books where you can just turn your brain off and enjoy them. I could do that with most of Sarah J. Maas, to be quite honest with you. Her books are, at the very least, a little better thought out. I feel like there's no gaping plot holes most of the time. I feel like the dialogue is not entirely lost. Writing's not that great. The worlds are hit or miss that she creates, but I can turn my brain off sometimes. I did for Throne of Glass and Court of Thorns and Roses. I did not like them, but I could at least enjoy the ride. Fourth Wing, Absolutely not. There's absolutely no way you can ignore the glaring issues with this book while reading it. At least I couldn't. Nothing felt like it got the care or attention it deserved, from the writing to the fantasy elements to the plot to the characters to the romance. How are you a romance author and you wrote such an undeserved romance? Like, it felt unearned. The writing was just worse than things I had read on Wattpad growing up, and I am still in shock that this got published and has a 4.6 average rating on Goodreads. I just feel depressed that our collective societal bar for fantasy is so low. We deserve better fantasy books. We deserve better fantasy romance. And it's out there. Stop reading Fourth Wing. Okay, let's finish on one positive review before I get into some currently readings. Because I'm gonna get upset if I keep thinking about Fourth Wing. Let's talk about They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is a series of essays about music and culture, and oh my god, was it spectacular. Abdurraqib's writing just pulls you in so well. He's a black man living in America, and I am a white woman living in Canada, and yet when he opens up about music and his world, and it's music that we both share in common, like a love for, he writes about concerts, he writes about just albums, I feel drawn into his world. I feel like I understand him a little bit better, because music is a universal language, and Abdurraqib really taps into that, and it's just an absolutely beautiful thing to witness. We've all had those experiences at concerts or listening to an album that we just feel so connected and tapped into the human experience, and somehow Abdurraqib managed to translate that through writing in these essays, and also bring in a lot of little cultural touch points and events that have happened, and just general sentiments about his life, about the broader Black experience in America, and I just thought overall it was so masterfully done. I'd recommend this book to literally everyone, even if you think you might not know the artists, or even if you don't really care all that much about music or American culture. There's just something so incredible about his writing and his worldview and his point of view that is just so worth reading. I am currently reading this for school. I've been at it since January. It's so dense. Russian hybrid warfare, it's just thrilling stuff. I should probably finish it before the semester's done. Kind of suck to leave it unfinished. It's good. It's relevant for my course. It's relevant for my interests. It's just such a slog. I'm gonna get laughed out of the room for this one. Count of Monte Cristo. I have restarted it from the beginning. This is a different edition, you might notice, because it is a different translation, and it's a lot better than the last one, so hopefully that means I'll actually finish it this time. I'm gonna try to finish it in 2024. I think that could be possible. I'm just slowly reading it like during lunch breaks and stuff. I'm hoping that just, a couple hours every week, just knock it out and finish it. But it is really, really enjoyable. And that is everything. I don't know how long this is. I'm so sorry. If there's anything that you would like to hear more about, or something that you saw me mention on Goodreads, because there's a ton of other things I've read, I just don't want to go through everything, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it. I definitely want to turn this channel back to more reviews. I do keep wanting making fun stuff. I enjoy making the fun stuff, but I think reviews are still the bread and butter of the bookish internet, so I definitely want to keep focusing on those. But other than that, let me know, how have you been? Are you surviving? I've talked to anyone pretty much on the bookish internet for a while, so yeah, let me know how you're doing. What's the best book you read in 2023? There we go. That's a good one. I'm always looking forward to that. Oh, and negativity. What's the worst book you read? I like tea. As I mentioned at the beginning, my socials are, as always, linked down below, and I am being a bit more active on those, so you could follow me there, mainly TikTok and Instagram and Goodreads. And other than that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for still being here, or for joining if you're new, and I will see you next time. Bye.